capture, mark, release. If you look at how we arrest people and prosecute them for corruption, it's got that pattern. You capture, you mark, and release. Only to capture and mark and release another day in the future.
Now, Kenya loses about a third of its budget to corruption. And according to Transparency International, we are ranked to position 144 out of 183 in the world in the Corruption Perception Index. This remains the biggest monster for Kenyans, as Africa's Center for Open Governance, AFRICOG, now attributes it to state capture. In a report released today, AFRICOG puts the office of the DPP and other state agencies on the spot as it concludes that recently witnessed prosecutions are just but publicity-driven and are likely to deepen rather than undermine corruption. Now, the report goes ahead to term the prosecutions as weaponized to partisan ends for the 2022 elections. This simply means what Kenyans are seeing is just but a cosmetic war against graft. But is it? Tonight on The Big Story, we speak to the Secretary, Public Prosecutions Service, Dorcas Odwor, on the status of prosecutions in the country and where we are. But first, our lead reporter, Sophia Onuna, spoke to Gladwell Otieno, the Executive Director, AFRICOG, on the details of the report released today on capture, mark, and release mission. Let's take a look at that interview.
Good evening. Yes, so today the Africa Center for Open Governance released a report on the state of the nation that is focusing on state capture, what they describe as Kenya's inability to fight corruption. State capture speaks around issues and touches on private interests being able to have this great influence over government's decision making, and these decisions aimed at benefiting this very small number of elite individuals. And so that is the concern here, that whilst right now in Kenya all the rage is about the anti-graft campaign, President Kenyatta has described it as a legacy agenda. He has come out many times to warn, to threaten, to affirm, reaffirm, and also sometimes has expressed hopelessness. You all may remember that sentiment. Mnataka nifanye nini sasa? So let's talk a little bit more what this portends for the country. Is Kenya under state capture? I have with me the Executive Director, AFRICOG, Gladwell Otieno, to talk more about what their study has found and what this report really just captures. Thank you so much for making time for us. So you believe Kenya is under state capture. Talk to us about why.
Okay, let me explain the background of this discussion. We have always been working, as long as we've existed, since 2007, and obviously personally before that, we've been working on corruption since the late 90s. And during that time, we've advocated for many changes: legal reform, institutional reform, the setting up of an anti-corruption commission, for example. The changes to various institutions, and we've done a lot of this. What we know is that Kenya has an extremely sophisticated anti-corruption architecture, but it continues to be one of the most corrupt countries in the world when measured by international indices. It continues to be in the bottom, let's say 20% of Transparency International's anti-corruption perceptions index. So when we decided to do a review in view of President Kenyatta's I think it's the repeated announcement of an anti-corruption campaign, we decided to look at the issue, and we found that we were dissatisfied with the usual proposals for reform. We've passed a new constitution, and that new constitution has a chapter particularly on leadership and integrity. It has values which Kenyans wanted put into the constitution. It has provisions on public financial management. So that the new constitution was really the big sort of push for accountability. So we felt, okay, we've done this. We've got much better systems in terms of our laws, our institutions, etc. But it's still not working. Kenya is still corrupt. So what is the real problem? And we looked around the world. We looked at other examples, and for example, in South Africa, there's a very live debate around state capture, which is largely limited to looking at the depredations of the Zuma government. But we felt that the state capture thesis is much larger than that, and it's something that happens in many countries. And what we're saying is that there's, a sort of collusion between politics and business to capture the state and create a sort of shadow state, which is where the real business of these cartels is done, while the formal state, the edifice of the formal state, the executive, judiciary, parliament, elections, etc., all these procedures, they give the appearance of the existence of a state, but they've lost all substance, and they've lost all democratic substance. So these cartels are able to subvert anti-corruption reform because corruption is their life's blood. Yeah.
And you talk about in this report just why in Kenya we talk about the golden bag scandal, Anglo leasing, we talk about the Eurobond, and you say it's, there's a lot of talk of fighting this even ghost of scandals, but it has never happened, not because it can't, it's because those who really can do something about it will not, because then it unravels the entire system, is how you see it.
Yes, precisely. And that's where our title, Inside Kenya's Inability to Fight Corruption, is a bit of a misnomer. It's not inability. It's the fact that the logic of this system is corruption. A small minority captures the state, captures democratic processes. In order to do that, you have to win elections in order to win power. So you have to capture elections. You capture systems in order to gain great wealth, and you, in doing this, you have to be able to transition corruption across regimes. So we chose these three big scandals as emblematic of each regime. There were different characteristics of each large scandal: the Goldenberg scandal, the Anglo leasing, and now Eurobond. But in essence, these are handed over. Like we saw Anglo leasing transitioning from one government. It started under Moi, then it was repurposed and expanded under the Kibaki government. And there's a sort of agreement that we shan't attack each other, because obviously that would destroy the system, and we can't really expose each other fully, but we must act as if we're fighting corruption, because then if we're not, then our zero tolerance promises of anti-corruption are exposed to the public as meaningless. So. Yeah.
And yet in the last 1 year, we've seen changes in some of the critical institutions around the criminal justice system, a DCI, a new head, relatively new 1 year perhaps in office, DPP, AG. But you see this still as not the solution, that at the end of the day, your concerns are around the weaponization, you've described it as, of this anti-graft campaign.
Yes, we've had personnel changes, and definitely there have been improvements at the AG's office. The setting up of the multi-agency task force, etc., seems to be working more efficiently, less showmanship, more effectiveness. But we're seeing a lot of motion without movement. Yeah, we're seeing a lot, the hamsters in the wheel, and the wheel is turning, but there's not very much happening. And this is due to the sort of situation which we've described, that actually doing something about corruption, which is why that system exists, it becomes impossible for this system in itself to sort out. So there will be this or that public servant. Usually it's a junior one. This time around there may be more senior ones, we don't know. But the core of the system remains untouched. Yeah. So,
because at the end of the day, one listening to this would say, so are we doomed then? Because if this state capture is the most powerful, and you're talking about the private interest being able to have this kind of influence over those in government, what is the hope for ordinary Kenyans, those then clearly that are being fleeced and do not have a voice?
Yes, well, we did recognize that we were striking a rather pessimistic tone. And let me clarify, we're not saying that government is being held hostage by some sinister forces. We're saying that government itself has been captured, and state capture focuses on capturing power, which is personified in the presidency, and money, which is personified in the treasury, at least state capture Kenyan style. Elsewhere, it could be private interests which have inserted themselves into the policy process so that they're able to change the rules of the game, as it were. And here we're seeing that the rules of the game are being changed at the economic level. So we don't want to say that the state is there. This is one of the starker sort of conclusions that we make. We assume that the state is there to do a good job. And then when we call corruption a cancer, we often say we're fighting this cancer called corruption. It's as if, well, you just have to treat the state and cure it, and then we'll be all right. But what we're saying is the state itself, the presidency, corruption, all of these scandals, Goldenberg, Anglo-leasing, Eurobond, have involved the presidency. So it's not as if it's an outside body sort of capturing an otherwise well-meaning group of people.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, one of the concerns when you talk about Treasury, one of the newer scandals or issues in the public domain is around the IFMIS, which was touted by the government as this tamper-proof, the solution in as far as avoiding corruption and sealing those loopholes. But time and again, we keep hearing of these leakages that are allowed by this system. So do you see this as sort of like quote-unquote collusion to ensure that even the systems that are put in place allow for corruption to be pervasive?
Well, it's not systems which allow, it's human beings who pervert systems, human beings with ill intentions who pervert systems which have been put in place to minimize the loss of public resources. So anytime you have human beings with nefarious intentions, human ingenuity is endless as far as, devising ways in which to beat the system. So whatever system you put in place, you've seen how much money, for example, we've spent on securing our elections, and you saw how it was perverted. So it's a question of the human beings who are subverting systems for their own ends.
Yeah. There are those who say systems of justice may turn slowly, but it indeed will come to the conclusion and will have justice. Do you not see merit in that at the end of the day there will be justice?
Well, we've been talking about anti-corruption for many decades now, and I think you can count on the fingers of one hand people who've actually been not only investigated effectively, prosecuted, effectively, and actually convicted. If anyone has been convicted, those have been largely some small fry, as we tend to call them, people who are paying for the sins of their seniors. So deterrence, the deterrent effect of justice is lost if it drags through the courts year upon year upon year. So justice must be seen to be done, obviously, and obviously rushing the process so that you can get results will in itself defeat the purpose. But we don't have very much reason to have faith in, for example, the effectiveness of investigations. We see that the DPP is better resourced now, but we're, again and again we've seen, and the judiciary throws out cases justifiably if they're not effectively investigated, if good cases aren't brought. So, I think we've waited long enough. We may see something, but in essence, these actions are not adequate to address the scale of the problem.
Yeah. And also the report captures the litany of commissions of inquiry we've had, the task forces. You talk about over 30 commissions that have been established, task forces as well. There have been reports out of that, but recommendations largely end up being shelved. We never quite see full implementation. You also talked about some of these reports being doctored, so that going forward, for the Kenyans watching, in your view, what must happen? Because also with that tying it to the definitions you give of corruption, the petty corruption that everybody tolerates and says, this is fine as long as, get out of trouble, and the grand corruption. So what is a conversation, what's a paradigm shift that needs to happen in your view?
Okay, in terms of petty and grand corruption, there's a discussion in the report about it, because over the years we've theories about corruption have been developing, etc. And what we call petty corruption is your cop on the street who's taking a bribe. And grand corruption will be your mega heists like Anglo-leasing or, Eurobond, where we don't know what happened to about $1 billion of the first Eurobond issue. what we're saying is that actually petty corruption is not petty, because it involves entire systems. It involves corrupting entire systems, and it involves millions of transactions. So it's a much more damaging. It's much more damaging in a way because it's really injected into everyday life, and Kenyans are being victimized. Yeah, what we are saying is that Kenyans are also being sort of pulled into complicity for massive petty corruption. Even though what's happening is that they're being extorted. Yeah, if the police stop you on a Friday and you don't have an ID, you're forced to pay a bribe because you don't want to spend the weekend in custody. So what we were pointing out today was that that's not Kenyans being corrupt. That's Kenyans being robbed at gunpoint often. So petty corruption is just as damaging. Grand corruption involves much fewer people. It doesn't have to get into the system because it involves, probably corrupting some security contracts, like happened in Anglo Leasing, where basically some fake companies were given money for non-delivery of goods or delivery of shoddy goods at a very highly overrated price, with the Kenyan government advancing the money itself to these crooks to so-called pay for these shoddy deals, which were just basically a way of political financing. Right. Yeah, so both are harmful. And what are Kenyans to do about it? You said before that we make it sound quite hopeless and a very pessimistic situation, but there's still a lot that can be done. As civil society, we continue to document. We, if nothing else, we're documenting so that one day, if anything can be done, it will be done. We can use the possibilities contained in the Constitution, although there's clawback by the powerful against the provisions of the new Constitution. There's attempts to weaken institutions because state capture depends on weaker institutions, which is why you've seen attacks on the Auditor General, attempts to reduce the independence of the Auditor General, intimidation of the judiciary, etc. So what we're saying is that we can still try to use the possibilities offered in the new Constitution, our freedoms, to at least, speak out about corruption, educate people about corruption, address corruption at the county level, and
hope for the best. Finally, do you expect what you see happening in South Africa? You alluded to that a little bit earlier. State capture there, President Zuma heavily, linked to the Gupta family, and we're seeing some of those in terms of the judicial processes starting to play out. Is that likely to happen in Kenya? If so, when would you give that timing?
Well, what we're seeing in Kenya, when you talked about corruption being weaponized, anti-corruption being weaponized for political goals, what we're seeing is a succession struggle. The current regime, the Kenyatta regime, is trying to secure its future because every regime that's in power would want to be assured that it's not going to be prosecuted once it's out of power. So there's an attempt to also use corruption to defeat its opponent and erstwhile ally, the deputy president. So what we're seeing is a succession struggle here. We don't know how it will turn out. It's being played out against a background of an intense economic crisis. It's being played out against a background of intense indebtedness. It's being played out against the background of a sort of grab to monopolize the economy by the economic interests around the Kenyatta family. So all of this is really a recipe for some sort of blow up. But we're not saying that disasters in the offing, but all indications point to a very turbulent sort of election period. We're in electoral mode now, and all indicators point to continued turbulence and perhaps a recurrence of violence, but definitely this is a struggle about, who is going to own Kenya going forward.
Thank you very much for your time. Gladwell Otieno is the Executive Director, AfriCorg, and in that report on the state of the nation, according to the Africa Center for Open Governance, questioning, is this just narrative or is there real, true intent to fight corruption? In their opinion, not. Going forward, will this change? It's a matter of time. We'll wait to see. Back to you.
And right at the middle of the anti-graft war is the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And joining us tonight to just dissect this issue is Dorcas Odwor, the Secretary of Public Prosecution Service. Remember, the Office of the DPP is on the spot from this particular report that says there isn't really much going on as far as the anti-graft war is concerned. Ms. Odwor, thank you very much for joining us here tonight on The Big Story. Gladwell Otieno there says we are seeing a lot of motion, but there is no movement as far as the war against graft is concerned. I'd like to start with a reaction to that statement.
Well, I do not know what kind of movement she expects, but I think we have to be grateful that people like Gladwell Odwor can speak the way they do in our country today. I mean, the opportunity and the atmosphere to speak like that speaks for itself, and I think we've done very well as a country. There are many countries that you cannot even have the opportunity to speak like she does. But the fact that we have accepted that corruption is a problem and we are dealing with it and we can discuss it in television like we are today, I think is a step forward. And I think we have to accept that corruption is a worldwide problem. It's a problem in Kenya, but it's a worldwide problem. It's found in all societies, in all races, in all cadres, in all nations. It's international. And that's the reason why the international community responded by the Merida Convention that is dedicated to fighting corruption. And this is a response to show that it is accepted that corruption is found in all countries of the world, in all races and in all situations and in all communities. And I think there is a tendency to, when we are discussing corruption to try to say that it is native in developing countries or in less industrialized countries, but it is not true. It is everywhere. And people tend to just speak about legal corruption, the legal definition of corruption. What about moral corruption? And I think it is moral corruption that fuels legal corruption. And moral corruption is more dangerous. It is found everywhere. It's found in our houses, in our churches, in our homes, in our society. We might be talking about a venality of human beings where everybody is bribable. The urge to take everything that does not belong to you, to be greedy. And that is the corruption that we all should be tackling. So I would have been happier if we speak more about what we can do as a country, because I am deep in hope. We cannot be hopeless. We have to start from somewhere, and somebody must start the fight. So instead of blaming people and instead of speaking about Kenya being captured by corruption, what are the solutions? We cannot just exist to document. There must be something we can do, because apart from being members of the civil society, they are Kenyans. They are human beings. They are churchgoers. They are citizens. They are women. They are fathers. They are mothers. What can they do other than being a member of the civil society?
Otieno speaks to majorly is a concern that has been raised even by Kenyans. And in that report, they've cited even past major scandals dating all the way from the 90s, looking at Golden Bag into the early 2000s, the Anglo leasing to Eurobond 1-2. And even now, as we speak, we're looking at a number of mega corruption cases. The biggest issue here is we are seeing a lot of arrests. We are seeing a lot of people being arraigned in court, but not much as far as prosecution is concerned. Do you get where Kenyans are coming from as far as this issue is concerned?
I do. And for the first time this year, we've recorded the highest number of convictions in prosecution cases. Since January 2018 to date, we've had 22 convictions, which is the highest ever since we started fighting corruption. Secondly, we have seen people being taken to court. We have seen governors being taken to court. We've seen former PSs and ministers being taken to court. We have seen the prosecution and investigation departments trying not only to take the foot soldiers, but everybody in society, even the principals. We are trying to go for their assets, and you have seen us going to court very many times to seize assets. We are trying to trace assets, and we are taking these people to court. We are putting the evidence before the court. We are doing our part. And it's not only the responsibility of the DPP to fight corruption. When it comes to the criminal justice system, it is a whole system. And everybody must put in what they can. And I think everybody is putting in what they can. And we have to be patient as Kenyans, because now we have re-strategized and we are putting in newer techniques of fighting corruption. We are not only taking people for criminal offenses, but we are going after proceeds of crime, asset forfeiture and confiscation. These take time. And if you realize that the present corruption is very complex, people use technology, the crime scene has changed, they use professionals, they use legal entities, they use all the institutions that exist that are supposed to be positive to us. Those are the ones that they use. Penetrating these institutions and penetrating these technologies in order to find evidence takes time, needs money, and that is exactly what we are doing. And I am convinced, and I have hope that the path that we have taken and the cases that we have taken to court and the success that we have had is evidence that the future is bright, and we are going to fight more to make sure that Kenyans are satisfied. And we realize that we cannot do this if we don't deal with cases that congest the system. And that is the reason why we are strategizing, looking at the legal system on how we can decongest the system so that we can deal with more complex cases and cases that have an effect on the economy. We are trying to face our prosecutions so that we can at least have successes as we go forward. And it takes everybody. Kenyans are the witnesses, Kenyans are the victims, Kenyans are the accused persons, they are the suspects, they are the officers. So it takes all of us to assist the institutions so that we can fight corruption.
Is this successes that Kenyans have waited to see for decades now from all the major corruption scandals that have been witnessed in this country? What makes you think this will be different, that this time round there will be results? What are you doing differently?
This time down will be different because we not only want to take people to court, but if it is money, if it is assets, if it is land, we want to tell Kenyans, this is what was taken away from you, this is where it is, we are bringing it back and giving it back to society. And even if we don't, because of legal technicalities, we'll point out to you how much money was stolen, what assets were taken, and where they are, and what we can do as a country to get them back. We have to get back the assets from the criminals, and that is new, and we are going to see a difference.
Let me now bring in Joy Mdivo. She's the Executive Director, East Africa Center for Law and Justice. She's joining us by way of phone here on The Big Story. Thank you for joining us tonight. That report by AFRICOG there, quite pessimistic, I must say, but they say, at the point where we are, Kenya almost needs to go back to reset settings as far as corruption is concerned. But Ms. Dorcas Odwor there says, no, there is hope. A lot is being done. A lot of energy has been injected into this fight. Joy Mdivo, what do you think?
Thank you for having me, Akisa. I'm very, very grateful to be on the show. Mm-hmm. I agree with Ms. Dorcas on the fact that a lot is being done. That is apparent. There's a lot of activity. Remember Kamata Friday and all the other things that Kenyans have been treated to. The question is the willingness to actually follow through with the processes that we have begun ourselves. I have gone on record, and I go on record again, saying sometimes the criminal justice system is actually used to sanitize the insanitable. You find people who use the system to go through so that the law of double jeopardy protects them from future prosecution, so that you can always say, I was tried for that and I was discharged. And that's why I also agree with Ms. Dorcas that fighting corruption is not just up to the state agencies. It has to take a complete change in our entire psyche as a nation. We put up with a lot of complacency that even in our own private lives, we accept as part of normalcy. That's why Ms. Gladwell said earlier, the petty corruption is actually more dangerous, because when the Mwananchi actually understands a situation where a police officer can be compromised, it means even in grand corruption, all they need is an opportunity for that common Mwananchi to become a prominent Mwananchi. And when he's a mheshimiwa, what he did on a small scale, he will do on a large scale. So there is need to deal with our own psyche as a nation, But at the same time, we cannot underestimate or understate the role of private individuals and private businesses in subverting the course of the fight against corruption in this country. It's very apparent, and it's a glaring anomaly, for lack of a better word.
It is these two groups that have seen Africa draw the conclusion that there's state capture because of collusion between business people in this country and politics, and they have created an environment for corruption to thrive for them. How easy or how hard it is for Kenya to wiggle themselves or itself out of this situation?
It's a little bit difficult because Kenyans right now already have an appetite for money. That's one of the biggest weaknesses, I think. That's one of the biggest weaknesses, I think, for us as Kenyans, is we have a very serious appetite for money. And that is that when
Okay, I think we seem to be experiencing some technical issues there with that link with Joy Mdivo, but we will be speaking to her a little bit later. Joy Mdivo is the Executive Director of the East Africa Center for Law and Justice. And from what she says, she says that, yes, there is hope, but this seems to be quite a complex situation we're handling here. I want us to take a quick break. We'll be back with more, and of course, still with the conversation here with Dorcas Odwal, the Secretary, Public Prosecution Service. Any questions for her? Tweet us at Akisa at KTN News KE. Let's keep the conversation going. What are your thoughts? Are we under state capture, or is there hope? Stay with us.